Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar today. I'm joined by my lovely colleague Marta and she will be running the session today. We'll be having a look at the writing exams at level 1 and 2 and looking at a bit of standardisation across these levels. So I will pass you on to Marta.
Okay, thank you very much. Fantastic. So this is level 1 and level 2 ESOL skills for live writing, and we are going to look at how to make fair and accurate judgments for level 1 and level 2 candidates writing in line with Trinity benchmarks. And it comes in really useful when you're doing your mock exams or where you're doing your initial assessments, or when you're being asked to look at things like predicted achievement, so that you can accurately see how well your students performing against Trinity benchmarks. So we're going to use amplification, generic performance descriptors, and we will be using those to award marks at level 1 and level 2 for the scripts, the sample scripts that you have been asked to have a look at prior to the session. We will identify some differences and similarities between the task format, assessment criteria, and some of the grammar and functions at level 1 and level 2. And we're also going to identify what the pass mark is at level 1 and level 2. So by the end of the session, you should be able to answer these 3 key questions. So how do we use generic performance descriptors and amplification to award marks? How do assessment criteria and grammar and functions differ at those 2 levels, level 1 and level 2? And what are the pass marks for each of the levels, level 1 and level 2? So before this session, what we're going to be using for this session are 3 key documents, if you like. So the specification for level 1 and level 2, and they can be downloaded from Trinity website. A mark sheet, again, that is available on Trinity website, and 2 marks example scripts that again can be downloaded from the website. All 3 documents you are signposted to all 3 documents in the pre-session activity that you will have completed. It's really useful to have all 3 of those in front of you for this session. So I will be making reference to those three documents and the relevant pages. The specifications at level 1 and level 2 includes all of the exams, so speaking, listening, reading, and writing. We will only be looking at writing today, and the 5 kind of key parts of those are the unit, what the unit for level 1 and level 2 writing looks like. So what is it that we're expecting students to achieve? What the format of those exams, of the exam is? What is the amplification? And from the pre-session task, you will know that the amplification is the detail behind the criteria. Generic performance descriptors are used to award marks, and again, they are available in the specification. And for each of the levels, level 1 and level 2, there's a list of key language that students, candidates are expected to demonstrate in the exams, and they are in the specification as well. So these are the key kind of parts of the specification that you need to be familiar with or have handy for this session, but also for you to be able to teach, to assess, to mark the mock exam papers or practice papers for your students. These 5 parts are really useful. Now, for level 1, you will have been asked to look at candidate 1 for the marked writing paper 1. So that's the scripts that we will be looking at for level 1 and for level 2. And I will be referring to those scripts throughout the session. So make sure you've got those open so you can have a look at them. So just to do a quick check on the pre-session task, the format of level 1 writing and level 2 writing. How many tasks are they? What are they? So I'll give you 2 seconds to put some information in the gaps. And most people will get these correctly very quickly. So there are 4 tasks at both level 1 and level 2. Both level 1 and level 2 have 4 tasks. And the first task at both levels is a form. So we'll look at the form first in a short while. The second task is a report or article at level 1. And that is usually, that is a report to a teacher, and it would be a neutral tone or register. And in that report or article, candidates will be asked to describe, report or recommend. And it's quite important to pay attention to the purpose of the task, because it comes up in some of the criteria, which I'll be referring to later on. So it's not just what the candidates are asked to write. It's not just about the text type. But at level 1 and level 2, it's really important they understand what the purpose of their writing is as well. At level 2, candidates write the form as a first task. And then the second task would be a review or an article. And that often, that is for any interested public. It will be neutral in terms of tone and register. But the aim of it would usually be to inform and entertain. Again, it's quite important in that task to pay attention to the purpose of the task. Task 3 in both at both levels is a letter or email, and in both level 1 and level 2, this will be a formal letter or formal email. At level 1, it will be to explain something and to make requests, to request. At level 2, it would be to narrate, request, to complain, criticize, or warn. So there are quite a few very specific things that students have to put across in that letter. The last task, both level 1 and level 2, is either an email or an online message. At both levels, this would be to a friend, and it would be informal. And again, there would be purpose. It's quite a short task. At level 1, to explain, request, suggest, or ask for advice. At level 2, it would be to speculate, persuade, request, or ask for some information or advice. So the purpose, as I said, quite important, not just the format of the task. So let's have a look at what, as examiners, as markers, what we use to award marks. So we looking at the candidate script, the student script, we use assessment criteria, and the assessment criteria are in the specification. So we're looking at things like plain text at level 1, plain text for a specific purpose, or for example, use grammar correctly. So we have this assessment criterion. At both level 1, level 2, these are on page 18 in your specification. We then have amplification, and amplification is the detail that you will expect a student to produce for each of those assessment criteria. So for level 1, for example, where it says produce content appropriate to purpose, the assessment criterion, amplification gives you a bit more detail around it. So it says things like select how much to write and the level of detail to include, make decisions about the length of text and level of detail required depending on content, etc. So it gives you a detail behind the assessment criterion. And then we also use generic performance descriptors. Now, generic performance descriptors describe the expected level of performance in order to achieve a mark from 0 to 4. So generic performance descriptor might say the candidate demonstrated a wide range of something, or they have done it with consistency. And this is what will help you decide, is this a 3-mark performance or a 4-mark performance? So it helps you decide on the mark against that assessment criterion, against that amplification for the level for the assessment criterion. So these are the 3 pieces of information, the 3 documents, if you like, that you need to have in front of you when you are marking a script. So what do they look like in practice? Each of the generic performance descriptors is linked to a learning outcome. For level 1 and level 2, we've got 3 learning outcomes. So the first one at both levels is linked to planning. And at level 1, it's called plan text for specific purpose. And at level 2, level 1 and level 2 is called plan text for a given task, or plan text for specific purpose. And for this learning outcome, for planning, we would only be awarding either 0, 2, or 4 marks. So we do not award 1 or 3. So the candidate, if the candidate has made a fairly detailed and highly relevant plan, or fairly detailed, highly relevant plans for 1, 2, or 3 tasks, they get 4 marks. If there is at least some evidence of a plan, they get 2 marks. If there is little or no evidence of the plan, so either no plan has been made or just a few words have been noted, then they get 0 marks. So for planning, we only give them 0, 2, and 4. And when we're looking at performance descriptors, it's useful to highlight the key words that will help you make a decision whether it's a 2 or a 4. So some evidence for a 2, fairly detailed and highly relevant for a 4. So that will help you kind of decide, is that a 2 or a 4 when we look at planning. The second learning outcome for all of for both level 1 and level 2 is linked to producing text. So being able to produce text for different tasks, and we have between, well, we have 1, 2, 3, or 4 marks if the candidate has produced that task, has produced anything in that task. So if we're looking, one of the assessment criteria for this learning outcome is to use grammar correctly. It's only one out of several criteria, but that's one that I think is probably the easiest to demonstrate. So use grammar correctly, 2.4 at both level 1 and level 2. And if we have to decide whether we giving that 1, 2, 3, or 4 marks, these are the kind of words we would be looking at. So if the candidate has demonstrated in that task a wide range of the features of the amplification. So in the amplification, there are several features that are listed. If a wide range of those can be identified with a level of consistency and comprehensive control, that candidate would get 4 marks for that assessment criterion. Does that mean it has to be every single thing on that list? No, a wide range doesn't mean, you know, it's not a tick list. The candidate might not be able to demonstrate every single item, especially for the grammar criterion, but they have to demonstrate a wide range of features. If they demonstrated several appropriate features, and these are fairly consistent, that candidate would be awarded 3 marks. If there is 1 or 2 appropriate examples, then it might not be consistent, but it's minimally met, demonstrated. That candidate would get 2 marks for that assessment criterion. And if there is evidence of an attempt, but it's not successful, it might be inappropriate or incomplete, then the candidate would get 1 mark for that assessment criterion. So I gave you an example with grammar here, but similarly in punctuation, for example, if the candidate has used a wide range of punctuation with consistency and comprehensive control, they would get 4 marks. If they've got several appropriate features, so several appropriate punctuation, examples of punctuation appropriate for level 1, and they're using those fairly consistently, they would get 3 marks, and so on. So for each of the assessment criteria, we would use the generic performance descriptor to decide on how many marks they're getting. And the third generic performance descriptor is used for the one learning outcome related to completing a form. This at level 1, at level 2 would be a form with some open answers. So we're not only assessing this descriptor, this assessment criterion, we're also assessing the produced text ones. But for this one, if all or almost all of the form is completed with a high level of appropriacy, the candidate would be awarded 4 marks. 2/3 or around 2/3, 3 marks. At least half of the form, 2 marks. And the main purpose of the form is not fulfilled. So for example, key information is missing or it's inappropriate, the candidate would be getting 1 mark in that case. So these are the generic performance descriptors that we use to decide on how, what are the marks that we're assigning to that candidate, that script, for that particular assessment criterion. So let's have a look at planning at level 1 and level 2. So the candidate is asked to show, to plan at least 1 answer, 1 task. They can plan 3 or 2. The final task, the informal message or email to a friend, is the one that we wouldn't normally mark in, we wouldn't normally plan in real life. You wouldn't plan a message or a short informal email that you're sending to your friend. So this is what we would expect the candidates to recognize at level 1, level 2, that you don't plan informal messages and emails. So we would expect candidates to not plan task 4 at level 1, at level 2. They can plan at least, they must plan at least 1 task. And at level 1, the 1.1, the assessment criterion 1.1, plan text for a specific purpose. Amplification for this criterion is on page 20, and it talks about applying specific planning strategies as appropriate. So taking into account the purpose, context, and audience, using different techniques for planning. So things like brainstorm, notes, diagrams, flowcharts, deciding on when planning or drafting is appropriate and when it's necessary, and then planning and drafting, redrafting is appropriate. So that's what the amplification says for level 1. For level 2 in this criterion, the amplification talks about planning and drafting a piece of text clearly and effectively. Again, using a range of techniques, but also the purpose for writing. So looking at purpose for writing, context, and audience in the planning process. So the candidates are asked to produce at least, plan for at least 1 answer. And we've got 3 potential marks. We can give 0 if there is little or no evidence. We can give 2 if there's some evidence, or 4 if the plan or plans are fairly detailed and highly relevant. Now, you've been asked to have a look at candidate 1 marked learner work for level 1 and level 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few seconds to have a look at those tasks at level 1 and level 2 and look at the plans that candidates produced and assign your marks. So assign the marks for planning at level 1 and level 2. Either 0, 2 or 4. And for the plan at level 1, the candidate planned 1 task, the candidate planned task 2. And there are some notes in there with some bullet points. For level 2 candidate 1 at level 2 planned task 1 with some parts, with some numbering, headings, subheadings, with a little bit more information added to it. So the plan at level 1 is the plan that is there is some evidence of planning, and the plan at level 2, you can see how relevant it is to the task, and it's highly relevant, and it is fairly detailed. Looking at the plan at level 2, you would be able to write something. So it's organized into parts, and it includes all the relevant subsections and the detail that is important. So effectively you'd be able to write that piece of text looking at that plan, and it clearly shows that it helps candidate with the completion of the task. So that candidate at level 2 gets 4 marks for that plan. There are a few more plans to look at available on Trinity website. So if you've awarded different marks, do go and have a look at marked learner work. Another example of marked learner work. Do the same thing that we've just done. So look at the piece of writing, look at the plan, award your mark for the planning, and then check what the Trinity benchmark is. But these are the marks for candidate 1 at level 1 and level 2. So what we're going to do now is have a look at task 1 across both levels. So task 1 for both level 1 and level 2 is the form. And there are different contexts. So at level 1, it would be connected with education, training, work, or social roles. At level 2, there would be a wide range of formal contexts. They do have very specific purpose, and you'll be able to see that from the task as well. They are different in terms of length, and what you can see below is the assessment criteria that we are assessing in that first task. So at level 1, 2.1, we're talking about content which meets the purpose effectively. So has the candidate included the right level of detail? Is the content relevant to the purpose? So does it inform, does it persuade? So that's the kind of things we would be looking at for 2.1. We also assess 2.4 at level 1, and 2.4 at level 1 use grammar correctly. When you look at the amplification for this, there's quite a long list of bullet points in terms of grammatical items. Now, not all of them will be relevant to the task. So you have to, when you're assessing and looking for a wide range, it's a wide range from the amplification that is appropriate for that task. The level 1 candidate that we will be looking at is an application form for a course and for time off to do a course. So there are several parts of that form where the candidate is able to produce a wide range of grammatical items from the amplification. Punctuation, again, in the amplification, use punctuation correctly. In the amplification, there's a list of different things that candidates have to be able to demonstrate. 2.6 is called spell words accurately. Now, in the amplification, you will see several bullet points, and the first two talk about the knowledge of special interest lexis. So it's not just whether the candidate can spell words, can spell words. It's also about the choice of words, the range of lexis they are using. And obviously that range of lexis has to be appropriate for level 1 and has to be appropriate for the task that they are completing. So the candidates have to demonstrate they have the wide range of lexis and they're able to spell it accurately. Now 3.1 is the form criterion. So we're using a different generic performance descriptor for it. And we're looking at candidates being able to complete forms with some complex features, being able to complete forms, give clear accounts without ambiguity, and so on. So these are the 5 assessment criteria that we are assessing at level 1 in the form. For level 2, in task 1, the form, candidates have notes, and this is something that sometimes candidates ask about. The notes are there for candidates to use, but they also need to be able to demonstrate the use of grammar, the lexis, the range of lexis. So they have to use the lexis, but they have to complete the task using the notes, but also paraphrase and add to those notes. So produce content. 2.1, there are 2 main parts of that assessment criterion. Use language effectively. This is a new criterion at level 2. It's not there at level 1. And this is about the register that is appropriate for the audience. So using the right style, the right register. It's about selecting language features that are appropriate for this text type. So specific lexis, collocations, any idiomatic expressions, the mode of address that is appropriate for the text that candidates are writing. So this is where the purpose is important for the task. So 2.3, using language effectively, is a new criterion at level 2. Use grammar correctly is similar criterion. Obviously, there is a different expectation in terms of grammar for level 2. Again, the list, the amplification for 2.4 is not a tick list. A candidate does not have to necessarily produce every single item on that list to be awarded a 4. 4 is awarded if the candidate used a wide range of the amplification, of the features of the amplification, and they used it consistently. But that has to be appropriate for the task, and that has to be at level 2. 2.5 is use punctuation correctly. Now, this is where, again, candidates have to be reminded to use a range of punctuation. So it's not just about, at level 2, it's not just about punctuating simple text, but commas for various purposes, using a full range of punctuation marks, including commas, for listing, for example, between clauses in complex sentences, after connectives like however, apostrophes, inverted commas. You know, there's quite a long list, but a full range of punctuation is expected at level 2. 2.6, spell words accurately. The same applies as what I said for level 1. It's not just about spelling words accurately. They have to be level 2. There has to be level 2 lexis. There has to be a range of level 2 lexis for students to spell accurately. 3.1, completing a form. Again, that's quite similar to in terms of amplification. So looking at how well candidates complete a form with complex features. So this is more of a kind of functional criterion. So this is the task 1 for both level 1 and level 2. And these are the assessment criteria and generic performance descriptors that are linked to the form. So candidate would be awarded 1 for assessment criterion 3.1. If the purpose of the form is not fulfilled, they would be awarded a 2 if at least half is completed, the primary aim is achieved. If 2/3 is completed, the main aim is achieved, that's 3 marks. All or almost all of the form is completed, all aims achieved, 4 marks in the assessment criterion 3.1. Now, because there is quite a lot of text, so it's not just filling in kind of short boxes, there's quite a lot of text. There are also assessment criteria that are linked to produce text outcome. So for level 1, 2.1, produce content appropriate to purpose. And at level 2, produce content which meets the purpose effectively. So we're looking at how effectively students are using language and how flexible they are with using that language. 2.2, use language effectively, is only assessed at level 2. Now use grammar, punctuation, and spell words. These 3 assessment criteria are assessed at both level 1 and level 2 in task 1. However, more detail on what goes into those criteria is in the amplification. So you can't just look at use grammar correctly and say that's the same for level 1 and level 2. The amplification, the detail behind use grammar correctly is obviously different at level 1 to level 2. And there is, you know, the candidates are expected to use a different range of or range of different grammatical items in those, and it's the same for punctuation and the same for spelling. So in terms of generic performance descriptors, so what marks we're going to award against all of these assessment criteria. If there is a wide range used consistently with comprehensive control, 4 marks are awarded. Several features and used fairly consistently, 3 marks. 1 or 2 examples, they might not be used consistently, but the assessment criterion is met minimally, is achieved. 2 marks. If there is an attempt, not successful, might be incomplete or inappropriate, then 1 mark is awarded for that assessment criterion. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, so before the session, we've asked you to have a look at the 2 scripts and award marks and for the form at level 1 and the form at level 2. So I'll ask you to, against all of those assessment criteria, so I'll ask you to have a look at that and think about why these marks have been awarded, why you've awarded those marks, and we'll have a look at the Trinity benchmarks in a second. So looking at the form, there are 5 assessment criteria to award marks for at level 1 and 6 at level 2. For candidate 1, so I'm going to just move to the level 1 marks. So this candidate at level 1, the form, 3 marks for produce content appropriate to purpose. So mostly relevant, appropriate content has been produced which fulfills the requirements of the task. However, if you look, there are 3 parts in that task, in that form, and the first paragraph does not describe the current duties. And this is what the candidates were asked to do. Please give a brief description of your current duties, and that's not what this candidate has done. So it is mostly relevant. Looking at the wording of generic performance descriptor, there are several features of the amplification. It's fairly consistent, but 2 parts. So one of the parts of the form is not the content produced is not appropriate to purpose. In terms of 2.4, the candidate uses several features of the amplification. There are several examples of level 1 grammatical items, but these are not necessarily used consistently. So there isn't, you couldn't say that there is comprehensive control. They are used fairly consistently, but there are some errors present in the text. So a range of level 1, several features of that amplification in terms of grammatical items, and used fairly consistently. In terms of punctuation, the candidate demonstrated a wide range of punctuation, and it's well controlled. So there are apostrophes for possession, for example, which are used successfully. Spelling and the range of lexis is very accurate. There is a wide range of lexis, especially when you look at lexis which is special interest vocabulary that is linked to the course, applying for time off, duties, etc. So these are the special interest lexis in this case. And there are 1 or 2 spelling mistakes. That does not mean that a candidate cannot get a 4. It's still a 4 in terms of lexis. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. 3.1 is the assessment criterion looking at completion of the form. And in this case, almost all parts of the form are completed accurately. So the candidate gets 4 marks for this criterion. At the same task level or form task at level 2, the candidate at level 2, there is a form, a feedback form, and expenses for the course. So the candidate has completed both parts of the form with appropriate level of detail, and it is consistent with relevant key information. So the message is communicated with appropriate content effectively. The register in this case is the candidate gets 3 marks here. The registered is appropriate, despite there is a slip at times, so it is mostly maintained. So it's fairly consistent. There is a limited range of vocabulary or lexis that is linked to these sort of forms. This could be something that the candidate might need to expand on. Grammar, in terms of grammar, there are some inaccuracies, but there is a fairly good range, and this is fairly consistent. So 3 marks in this case. Punctuation, appropriate but not consistent, so fairly consistent again, 3 marks. Spelling and the lexis, so 2.6. The spelling of high frequency words is accurate, but specialist interest vocabulary spelled incorrectly, and there are some persistent errors with some of the suffixes. So overall, the candidate meets this criterion, but this criterion is only met minimally in this case. Having said that, 3.1, the entire form is completed and the aims are fully achieved of the form. So could I use this form if someone gave it to me? Would it meet its purpose? Yes. So that candidate gets full marks for the form in this case. If your marks are significantly different from the Trinity benchmark that we just looked at, there are some other examples of marks candidate work on Trinity website. You can do the same thing that we've just done. So you can have a look at, you can look at the text, award your marks using the amplifications and the performance descriptors, and then have a look at Trinity benchmarks to bring you up to the Trinity benchmark for those levels that you teach. So let's have a look at the rest of the tasks for level 1. The three remaining tasks, so report or article, formal letter or email, informal email to a friend. The assessment criteria for task 2 and task 3 are the same, but the task is different. So remember, when you're looking at amplification, you need to adapt that to the context of the task. So produce content or for example, use appropriate language is different for task 2, which is neutral, task 3, which is formal, and task 4, which is informal. So appropriate language in all 3 tasks would be different. The expectation for what is appropriate language would be different. The structure in a logical sequence for purpose is assessed in task 2 and task 3. 2.4, the grammar criterion is assessed in task 2 and task 3, but not in task 4. Punctuation is assessed in task 2 and task 3, but not in task 4. And spelling, so the lexical range and spelling is assessed task 2 and task 3. And again, for all of these criteria and task 2, task 3 and task 4, so all the ones that start with 2, 2.1, 2.3, we use the generic performance descriptors that for Wonder produce text. So 1, if there is an attempt but not successful, incomplete or inappropriate. 2, 1 or 2 examples, not consistent, minimally met. 3, if there are several features, fairly consistent. 4, if there is a wide range, consistency and comprehensive control. Now I'm going to ask you to have a look at candidate 1 for level 1, and task 2 that you've been asked to look at before is an article about exercise and fitness, comparing in the candidate's country and in another country that the candidate knows well. The candidate is asked to describe, say whether all people see fitness as important or not, and suggest ways. So you've got different kind of parts of this task. So there is some describe, there is some more information, so agree, disagree, and suggest ways of making it easier for people to improve their fitness. So there is quite a lot the candidate has to do in this article. There are 6 assessment criteria here, and if you will have been asked to read the candidate answer, candidate's response, and award your marks. So I'm going to go straight to Trinity benchmark. And the candidate gets 3 marks for all of these, for all of the criteria. Now, I'm going to have a quick look at the 2.4. So with 2.4, when we're looking, 2.4 is use grammar correctly, and what we need to do, or what happens sometimes is you get a script that is written correctly, accurately, but it's written using language below level. Now, when you look at the amplification for level 1, it asks for using sentences consisting of a main clause and 1 or more subordinate clauses. So, for example, using conditional sentences. It also asks for sentence grammar, using sentence grammar accurately. So there is a whole range of grammatical items that are appropriate, that are expected at level 1, and all of those can be found in the specification on page 25 for level 1, and it includes things like simple, compound, complex sentences, noun phrases, verb forms, so a range of tenses, a range of models, adjectives, collocation of adjective, and so on. So the list, there's quite a long list. So a candidate who writes a perfectly or fairly accurate script but does not include level 1 features wouldn't necessarily have a high mark, because they do not demonstrate a wide range of features. So we need to, what we're looking for is those level 1 amplification features, the level 1 language. So in this case, it is mostly accurate with several features of level 1 key items. There are some conditionals there, but there are some errors in word order, and there are some errors with verb forms. So the candidate, although they are using a good range of features of the amplification, these are not used consistently. So the candidate gets 3 marks in this criterion. Now let's have a look at task 3 for the same candidate. And these are, so the task 3 was a letter, an email actually, and these are the marks that we awarded. So one of the criteria I would like to have a closer look at for level 1 here is the 2.2. Is the language the candidate has chosen here, is it appropriate? So this is the formal task, and the candidate uses some appropriate lexis. So what we've got in the amplification here is identify, register, the appropriate register. Use appropriate lexis, mode of address, and type of structure suitable for this situation. Use lexis that is appropriate. and recognise the need to be more explicit in written English. So for this criterion, the candidate uses some appropriate lexis. So we do have one or two examples of the amplification, but overall, so if you look holistically at that piece of writing, the lexis and register are not appropriate for this type of writing. So the candidate has demonstrated one or two examples. These are not used consistently, and therefore 2 is awarded in this case. Task 4 at level 1, the candidate is asked to write an email to a friend and explain the problem and suggesting a place to meet. Now, in this task, we're only looking at 2 assessment criteria. We're only looking at whether the candidate is answering the task. So are they producing content which is appropriate to purpose? Have they written the right amount and the level of detail is included? And whether appropriate language for this task is being used. So this is an informal task. And task 4, in this task, what we're looking for candidates to do is to demonstrate they can write informal pieces, produce informal texts. And so the task 3 is a formal one, task 4 is informal. Now in here, produce content appropriate to purpose. I sometimes get asked whether the length, the word count matters, and where it comes up. Now, in this task, the candidates are advised to write about 80 words. Now, we don't count the words, we don't stop marking if candidates have written too much. But in this criterion, produce content appropriate to purpose, is where we look at whether the candidate has selected the right amount and the right level of detail. So although we don't penalize for writing too much or too little as such, so we don't count words and say this candidate has written 79 and not 90 words or 80 words, the likelihood is that if they haven't written enough, they will not include all the relevant detail. If they've written too much, we will assess what they've written, everything they have written, but sometimes it might mean that they've included too much detail. Sometimes it simply means that they've run out of time. If they've written too much for one task, they will have run out of time for another task. So it will have an impact in that case. So the candidate here, all points of the tasks are addressed. They are addressed efficiently, effectively, consistently, and the candidate has provided the right level of detail. The tone, the register are fairly consistent. There's some formal vocabulary that is used, so it's fairly consistent rather than consistent for an informal email, and therefore this candidate gets 3 marks rather than the full 4 marks that you might get for if they wrote with consistent register. Now, these are all the level 1 scripts that we're looking at. There are some more scripts for level 1 available that have been marked with benchmarks, so you can have a look at those if you feel that you need more practice for level 1. And we're going to move on to level 2. So level 2, again, we've got 3 tasks. We looked at the form separately. We've got 3 tasks, 2, 3, and form. Review or article, task 2, formal letter or email, which is task 3, and the informal message or email to a friend. Really important to make a note on the purpose of the text, because it is what is assessed in 2.1. It will tell you the language that you need to use. In terms of using language effectively, it will tell you which language you need to use, and it will, to some extent, be reflected in the lexis that candidates have to use. So 6 assessment criteria in task 2 and task 3. And similarly to level 1, task 4 is a short task, and there are 2 assessment criteria that candidates are assessed against. So level 2, task 2, candidate 1. This is a review for a website about a program that the candidates enjoyed. It's either on TV, online, or on the radio. So they're asked to write a review for a website. And this candidate gets quite low marks for this. Now, it's really important to not just look at the task and say this is a fail, and this is not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're looking at each of the assessment criteria and each of the amplifications separately, and we award marks using generic performance descriptors against each of the assessment criteria. So 2.1, produce content which meets the purpose effectively. Is there any content that meets the purpose effectively? So the 2 items in the amplification here for level 2, select the level of detail and how much to write. So this candidate meets it minimally because they, in the first and the last paragraphs, they do provide some review of the program. The rest of the text is inconsistent. So it's not addressing the task, but the first 2 parts, or the first part, the last paragraph, do minimally address the task, and therefore the candidate is awarded 2 marks. For grammar, there is an attempt to meet the criterion. So there is at level 2 for 2.4, we are looking for a range of sentence structures that are fit for purpose. And again, the use of sentence grammar consistently, and again, the full range of grammatical items for level 2 is available in the specification. The 2.1, there is an attempt to meet the criterion. 2.4, sorry, there is an attempt to meet the criterion, but this is not successful. There are quite a lot of grammatical mistakes, so the candidate gets 1 mark here. The level 2.6, the lexis, most of the words are spelled correctly, but there are some inaccuracies, and the range is what affects the mark here. So in terms of the accuracy, the 2.6 amplification asks for appropriate special interest vocabulary, including technical words, wide range of common collocations, idioms, colloquialisms. So there's quite a long, there's quite a list of items expected. Again, this is met minimally. There is quite a restricted range, and there are some spelling errors. So this is level 2, task 2. Level 2, task 3 for this candidate is the formal task. And this is an email in which the candidate is supposed to email their manager requesting a meeting, outlining their concerns, and informing the manager of their availability. So this candidate, these are the marks the candidate gets. Now, again, we are not looking at, generally, is this a pass, is this a fail? We're looking at each of the criterion separately. So there might be there might be grammatical errors, but does the candidate produce content that is appropriate for this task? So 2.1, have they selected the right level of detail? Have they included the right level of information? And the answer is yes. You know, all the points of the tasks are addressed, they're addressed consistently, and they provide an appropriate level of detail. So full marks here. The 2.4, 2.5, the criteria, the grammar criteria and punctuation are not achieved as consistently. And so there are some examples. There's one or two attempts, one or two examples of the amplification, and that's why they awarded 2 marks. In terms of the use of register, so use of language, effective use of language, it's appropriate for the task. Although some parts are a bit too formal, appropriate vocabulary, sentence length, structure is used, and that's been awarded 3 marks. And task 4 for level 2, this is the informal task where the candidate is asked to write an email to a friend explaining the situation and asking for help. So this candidate gets full marks for the content they've produced because they've addressed all the points of the task efficiently, effectively, consistently. They've provided the right level of detail, but the register is at times inconsistent. It can be a bit formal. So when you look at generic performance descriptors, it is fairly consistent rather than consistent and controlled. It's fairly consistent. So that's why the candidate is awarded 3 marks for use of language here. Now, the question I sometimes ask when we're looking at candidate scripts is, does this candidate pass or does the candidate fail? And when we mark the papers, when I mark the script, I don't look at is this a pass or a fail script. We look at the assessment criteria, we look at the amplification, generic performance descriptor, and we assign each mark. So you might have a candidate like the one we've seen at level 2 that scores maybe lower mark in one of the tasks, might score a maximum mark, so 4 marks for one of the criterion, but then 1 mark for another criterion. Each of the criteria needs to be assessed separately. So how do we know whether the candidate passed or failed? Level 1, the maximum marks the candidates can achieve is 80. At level 2, it's 84. And these are the pass marks. So if they scored 53 at level 1, 56 at level 2, they pass the writing exam. So they might have a task that is slightly weaker, balanced by another task that is slightly stronger, and then they achieve and they pass. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. Before we move to questions, please remember that there are all the specifications, all the documents, the scripts I was referring to can all be downloaded from Trinity website. There are also some additional marked scripts that you can look at. So if you would like more practice with standardizing your marking, there are some additional scripts, marked scripts that you can look at, award marks compared to Trinity benchmarks.